All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring how a single laboratory accident back in 1943 completely changed psychiatry and really our entire understanding of human consciousness forever. It's a story that bridges sterile Swiss laboratories, ancient indigenous rituals, and cutting-edge modern neuroscience. We're going to map out the deeply human narrative of a chemical that started out hailed as an absolute wonder, was later feared as a society-breaking problem, and is now experiencing a very serious, incredibly robust medical renaissance. The trajectory of this one substance really mirrors humanity's own turbulent relationship with the mind.
Section 1. The Accidental Discovery. So our story begins with Albert Hofmann. He was a meticulous chemist working at the Sandoz Pharmaceutical Labs in Basel, Switzerland. Now, back in 1938, he synthesized a compound called LSD-25 while he was just looking for a standard circulatory and breathing stimulant. The initial animal tests didn't really show much clinical promise, so the compound was essentially shelved, just put away. That is, until a strange, nagging hunch brought Hofmann back to it 5 years later. And this triggered a rapid, almost unbelievable sequence of events in April of 1943. On April 16th, Hofmann experienced this strange, dreamlike state after accidentally absorbing a tiny trace amount of the substance, probably just through his fingertips. Being the cautious scientist he was, he decided to systematically test it on himself 3 days later. So at 4:20 p.m. on April 19th, he ingested what he thought was an extraordinarily conservative dose, just 0.25 milligrams. But by 5 p.m., severe dizziness, anxiety, and visual distortions had already set in. He had unwittingly taken a massive dose of an incredibly potent compound. And because of wartime restrictions on automobiles at the time, the legendary ride home that followed actually had to happen on a bicycle. Escorted by his lab assistant for a short 4-kilometer ride, Hofmann's perception of reality completely, radically distorted. He felt like he wasn't moving at all, even though his assistant later said they were traveling quite rapidly. Today, enthusiasts actually refer to this famous date as Bicycle Day. But listen, we have to be clear here. This was absolutely not some fun, recreational joyride. Hofmann was terrified. He noted feeling that his body was lifeless and strange, and he genuinely believed his own chemical creation was dragging him into permanent insanity or even death. He lamented that he was leaving his young family and his promising research behind forever. He literally wrote, "I was seized by the dreadful fear of going insane. Was I dying?" But then, the next morning, that intense terror gave way to this profound sense of rebirth. He stepped out into his garden and felt a deep, pristine interconnectedness with nature, seeing the world as if it were newly created. This rapid shift, from death-like terror to a feeling of incredible renewal, cemented an immediate realization for Hofmann. This compound, while terrifying in its raw power, held immense importance for the field of psychiatry. Section 2. From Wonder Child to Problem Child. For the first 10 years after this discovery, the scientific community enthusiastically embraced the compound. Thousands of scientific publications were written detailing its potential. But then came the chaotic cultural explosion of the 1960s, particularly in the US, which drastically shifted its trajectory from a promising clinical tool to a highly illegal substance. When Hofmann wrote his autobiographical book in 1979, he actually wanted to title it Mein Wunderkind, or My Wonder Child. But there was intense publisher pushback. We're talking about a deeply polarized era where the substance was associated with public fear, uncontrolled street use, and really harsh legal restrictions, so the publisher demanded a change. It became Mein Sorgenkind, My Problem Child. Yet Hofmann later noted that it was, in reality, both things at the exact same time. Taking a strictly impartial look at this history, Hofmann believed the core issue really came down to context. He noted that the unsupervised recreational use in Western society stripped the compound of its reverence. He viewed this as a profanation of a sacred substance. His argument was basically that if it had been treated with the ritualistic caution and careful preparation that indigenous cultures historically applied to similar mind-altering plants, that whole wave of negative reactions and subsequent panic might have been completely avoided. Section 3. The Magic Circle. This brings us to a fascinating twist, where Hofmann's highly synthetic discovery in a sterile Swiss lab inadvertently led him to unlock the chemical secrets of ancient botanical mysteries from across the globe. Through a remarkable sequence of events, which he actually called his magic circle, his expertise made him the go-to chemist for investigating ancient psychoactive plants. First, his lab was sent samples of Mexican magic mushrooms, and he successfully isolated their active principles. Then he analyzed ancient morning glory seeds, known as aloliyuki, and, astoundingly, he found they contained derivatives of lysergic acid. That's the exact same chemical family he was working with in his lab. He had proven that these ancient botanical tools shared an incredible chemical overlap with his modern synthetic work. The Mexican mushroom connection is particularly striking. After animal tests failed to show anything, Hofmann essentially said, "Okay, I'll do it," and tested 2.4 grams of dried mushrooms on himself, experiencing a deeply Mexican visionary landscape. Within 6 months, his team isolated the active compounds, naming them psilocybin and psilocin. Working with ethnologist Gordon Wasson, Hofmann even synthesized these into 25 milligram tablets. And in this beautiful merging of science and tradition, he brought those synthetic tablets back to Mexico, where their efficacy was officially validated during a profound ceremony by the very Mazatec shaman, Maria Sabina, who had originally provided the mushrooms in the first place. And Hofmann didn't stop at Mexican botany. He applied this chemical detective work to ancient European history too. He co-authored a book hypothesizing that the famous 2,000-year-old Greek Eleusinian mysteries, which was a secret rite attended by some of the greatest minds of antiquity, actually utilized a psychedelic potion called kykeon. By analyzing wild grasses in Greece, Hofmann proposed this potion was derived from an ergot fungus, further connecting ancient spiritual rites right back to his own lysergic acid discoveries. Section 4. The Psychedelic Renaissance. So now we transition from those rebellious, chaotic teenage years of the 1960s into the mature, reflective adult phase of these compounds. Today, methodologically robust research at some of the world's most prestigious institutions is validating these compounds. We're talking about places like Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Imperial College, studying everything from psilocybin for trauma to LSD for neuroimaging to MDMA and ketamine for depression. Evidence-based medicine is truly awakening psychedelic therapy from a 40-year politically induced slumber, recognizing that these substances can be safe when used with proper clinical governance.
So why does all of this matter? Well, it completely shifts the paradigm of psychiatric care. With strict clinical guidelines, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is being used to treat severe addiction and access deeply repressed traumatic memories. But the absolute key difference here is the goal. Instead of merely masking symptoms with a lifetime of daily maintenance medications, this therapy aims to get straight to the root of the trauma. It offers the potential for durable, long-term remission. That's a real game changer.
To grasp exactly how these compounds trigger such a profound shift in consciousness, Hofmann aligned his views with the famous author Aldous Huxley and his reducing valve theory. The idea here is that the human brain normally acts as a filter. It purposefully restricts our perception of reality to a manageable trickle, just so we can function in everyday life, like finding food or going to work. Psychedelics, under this theory, temporarily open that valve, allowing an overwhelming flood of sensory and emotional data to enter our consciousness.
We've seen how a single lab accident rippled through time, bridging chemistry, ancient rituals, and modern therapy. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought from today's explainer. If our everyday consciousness is just a heavily filtered, restricted fraction of existence, basically just a simple survival mechanism, what profound insights, healings, and connections might we discover when we responsibly and carefully open that valve?